Well, I will tell you first that Chris has the greatest mom ever because she contacted us at cleveland.com and said she has this wonderful son who's walking the Appalachian Trail and he was going to do the whole thing. And so I made contact with her and she got me in touch with Chris as he was walking that trail. And he had some really interesting adventures. I never knew what they go through walking between the wild animals and having to stop for the night and all those things. And so take it away, Chris.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Duprow. I'm a 2019 Appalachian Trail through hiker. And what really got me interested in the actual trail was November 2017. I had a little low part in my life and I knew something was missing. So I wanted to do something adventurous. Well, one evening I was actually watching a Walk in the Woods movie with Nick Nolte and Robert Redford about the Appalachian Trail. And I heard about it, never really knew what all it was about. Well, it's nearly 2,200 miles from Georgia to Maine. So I really got interested, watched the movie, seeing Fontana Dam, which is amazing part of the trail. So I started reading books and watched a few other movies and jumping on YouTube. And I actually found somebody. I got all my what I thought was all my gear for the trail. Well, I was actually having like two of everything. So I went to an outfitter store and a young guy said, "Oh, I did the trail in 4 months." And I looked at him like, "Really?" He goes, "I was doing 20, 25 miles a day." And so he looked through all my gear. He says, he had a good pile. He says, "This is what you need and this is what you don't." So moving around to 2018. And unfortunately, what was it, towards the end of September 2018, I had a small stroke. And that almost changed everything at the moment. It took a mere 2 months to actually get back to normal. We able to walk again normally. So that really inspired me more to actually do the trail. So I set my trail date for March 22nd, 2019. And I found out everybody on the trail they don't go by the real name. They go by like a nickname, what they call a trail name. So I decided my trail name was going to be Polar Bear. I have a little polar bear with a little Coke and everything. So he was my mascot throughout the whole trail. Actually, a friend of mine gave me a hat that says, "Appalachian Trail, been there, done that." So it was pretty cool. The morning I started was Amicalola Falls National Park or State Park. And that has what they call the arch, as you've seen in the movie. So the next morning, I think it was about 9:15, March 22nd, I actually began the trail. And I started at 1,800-foot elevation right at the start. Within, I think, about 10 hours later, I only covered like 2,800 feet elevation up to Springer Mountain. And it was a pretty good climb. And I'm thinking, I could do 12 miles a day. Yeah, that first day taught me it ain't going to happen. And I found out throughout the first 78 miles of Georgia is extreme climbing. I mean, there's 4,000 footers, 5,000 foot elevations. There's, I think, 6,000 foot elevations. And the climb's pretty good. Most of the time, the actual descent is even more intense because it's like almost 70 degrees, and you got to take your time. So finally got a chance to finish up Georgia. Actually, by the third day, I'm thinking, what did I really get myself into? And I basically almost quit the trail. I was like, I think my body's going to shut down. And called home. I talked to my dad, and he really inspired me more. So each night before bed, I would tell myself 2 words: Mount Katahdin. And basically, that's what kept me going. I made great friends along the trail, all from around different parts of the world, from South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and even family and friends, and even friends I didn't know I had in Alaska, which my brother kept everybody informed on how I was doing, which I thought was pretty cool. So getting into, what was it? Well, I actually got to the North Carolina, Georgia border. And I'm thinking, it's going to be really cool and everything. Well, basically the border itself has a metal tube, and it's a tree has actually grown around it with a notebook. Uh, that was a border. I was like, really, this is it? So I'm like, okay. I finally get into North Carolina. I think it was probably about mile 200. Um, and I got a chance to climb Clingman's Dome, which is roughly the highest point on the actual trail itself, which is about 6,600 feet above sea level. And I thought it was pretty cool. The next big thing on the trail was getting into Hot Springs, North Carolina. And that was a day where the descent was just like tore me up. And I get down the bottom, and here's this amazing hostel, which I spent 2 days at. And usually when you're on trail, you're within 3 to 5 days of an actual small town. You can actually go in, resupply, maybe take a day off, and relax. So a lot of times I would actually be on trail and go into town, resupply, get back on the trail. So by this time I'm doing 15-mile days, which is, one of the highlights of the actual trail itself was a place called Over Mountain Shelter. And it was in the middle of nowhere, not even in the forest yet, but it had this massive red barn. And apparently it was used in 1 or 2 movies. And the size of this barn, you could put probably 60 hikers in, both outside and actually above the loft, which I thought was pretty good. I thought it was pretty. One of the really highlights of the trail, I got into my first 21-mile day was Damascus, Virginia. And they said average would be a 21-mile day. So spent a good day. Good day in there. Relaxed, took it easy. Another part of actually when I got into Virginia was the partnership shelter. And it was really neat because there was a visitors information center, and I get into the trail and found out, everybody has pizzas and 2-liter pops. I'm thinking, where'd you guys get all this stuff? I'm thinking maybe trail angels, which on the trail is really cool. There's just actually be people that will actually drive up or have a little get together, and they'll cook hot dogs, hamburgers, pops, what other medical gear that you need, maybe for sore ankles and blisters and everything. Actually, to McDonald's, Subway, all the fast food chains, they would actually deliver the food up to you at this trail, which is pretty cool. One of the really highlights of the trail, again, was I think it was my first 500. When I hit 500-mile trail, it was I forget that part of the trail. It was pretty good, pretty cool because there was Grayson Highland State Park, which is neat. They actually have wild ponies that you could actually interact with. They'll actually walk up to you. You can actually pet them and everything. And there's a storm that rolled in, and all of a sudden I hear this moving noise too. And I'm thinking, okay, I need to get into a shelter somewhere. And I'm thinking, ooh, and I come around the corner, and then all of a sudden I'm looking at a longhorn steer. I mean, I'm within 30 feet of this thing, and I'm thinking, ooh, this is going to get interesting. Didn't move, and I walked right past it. Was able to find a shelter. And usually on the trail, shelters are between 5 and 8 miles, which is pretty good. Basically, it's just like a small wood cabin, really open and everything. So, and you get an average maybe 10 hikers in shelters. Some shelters you can actually get about 30 people in because they're like double deckers, which is really cool. So, either that, or if there's no room in the shelter, we'd set up our tent and camp for the evening. So by the time I hit Virginia, one of the really big mile markers was mile 713, and that's called McAfee Knob in Catawba, Virginia. And McAfee Knob is like one of the most iconic parts because you could sit on the edge and get your picture and look down. It's probably about 280 degrees in all directions, and you could see 300 to 400 miles on a clear day. And I sat down the edge, and all of a sudden I looked down. I'm like, I'm about 300 feet off the ground. So I was like, okay, I'm going to move back real slow. So actually, I seen my first bear when I got into Waynesburg, Virginia. And I had a small interaction. Me and another hiker were on trail, probably 100 yards, and looked at us. We looked at it, and it just took off. One of the really cool parts was Fontana Dam. before you get into the Smoky Mountains, because it's on the actual walk in the woods, and it's just this massive dam, and it's the whole trail right across the dam, get in the Smoky Mountains, which was pretty cool. One of the other really cool towns to get into was Front Royal. The town actually loves hikers. I mean, we had a lady drive up and have a box of donuts for us, or a cooler with, you know, Pepsis and root beers and everything, which is pretty neat. I don't know, we about halfway down the trail was Harper's Ferry, great little town, and that is the Appalachian Trail Conservancy headquarters. And I tried, when we were at the start of the trail, we get a little red badge that gives you an idea that, okay, you're a through hiker. And I think my badge was 1178. I got into Harper's Ferry, and I think my badge was like 828, which is pretty cool. And that was at mile 1025. So it was neat. There were days when, I mean, you would be on top of the bald and see just hundreds of days. It would be totally crappy weather. You have to deal with it. Usually on the trail, we would actually come in contact with other hikers. A lot of people on trail actually get together and they have what they call a trail family. So they all keep together and do the trail by themselves, or do themselves, all themselves. Me, I basically did it myself. I would meet hikers on trail, interact, be around them for a couple of days, and then move on. One of the really cool points on the trail was in Maryland, and I mean, there was pretty good climbs and descents and everything. I think Maryland was the one that I actually came in contact with about a half mile in the trail. I came in contact with a porcupine, middle of the forest. I'm water and had a little break, little lunch, and also looked down and I got a porcupine within 2 feet of me, walks right up to me and looks at me like, "Oh, hello, human." So that was pretty cool. I think the other point when I seen another bear, I think it was near Pine Grove, Pennsylvania, and it was a really cool shelter called the 501 shelter. You can actually call again and have people bring up food for you, which is pretty cool. There was a part, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, which everyone's, oh, this is the most hardest part of the trail. It's called Delaware Water Gap. There was, I think, 2 points where it had really iffy descent, but there's no problem. I make it into town. It has one of the perfect ice cream shops. We had just ice cream the whole day, which we loved it. There's another part in New Jersey where it's called the Stairway to Heaven. And it is one heck of a climb. I mean, I think it was over 4,000 foot elevation. But usually when you have big elevations, you get up the top, it's worth seeing. I mean, you just have unbelievable sights. One of the really cool parts on the trail was we found a cabin called Upper Goose Pond Cabin at mile marker 1550.5 near Lee, Massachusetts, which is pretty cool. I mean, this massive lake at the cabin, we actually had a couple canoes. We actually take, out and go around the lake, which is pretty cool. One of the other highlights of the trail was when I made it actually to Rutland, Vermont, because there is a 12 tribes little sect called, and they have a little place called the Yellow Deli, which is pretty cool. So I spent 2 days in there. I think on the whole trail, I had 4 blisters, which I was very lucky. So I was very happy about that. When you get into Vermont, which is pretty cool because there is Killington, Vermont, there is a ski slope that actually the trail goes up the slope and down the other side. And I actually stayed at one of the actually not the resort, but there was a place for the ski patrol. And I sat on the top of the mountain and enjoyed the view. So it's pretty neat. Once I got into New Hampshire and the presidentials, I found out that my mileage really dropped. And I think it dropped from like 20 miles down to like 15 or between 11 and 15 miles. I mean, that's how intense the presidential mountains can be. Very beautiful, sights and everything, but it's real grueling on your feet. There was one part when I started the actual trail itself. It was Mount Lincoln and Mount Lafayette. There was an actual storm rolled in, and didn't really have much information about it. It was a nice rainy day. It stopped raining, drizzled a little bit. I started at about 70 degrees in temperature and began my climb. And by the time I got up and over the top of the mountains, right before Mount Lincoln, within an hour, it dropped 35 degrees. I mean, it went like really drastic. There was near zero visibility. So I'm looking for these white blazes that everybody follows on trail. There was very few, just they're real sporadic. So I'm not. It went from rain to sleet and hail. And then I had to deal with 35-mile-an-hour winds, which were just blowing me around, nearly off trail. So I get up Mount Lincoln, Mount Lafayette, get to the other side. As I make the descent, really intense descent into an area where I would actually climb up Mount Garfield. 70 degrees temperature, clear skies, everything returns normal. I'm thinking, what just happened for 5.5 miles? And I averaged on trail about 2.25 miles per hour. I started at 3:30 that afternoon, and I got to the other side at 7:30. That's how intense that storm was. And it took me nearly an hour to climb up Mount Garfield. And I took off my cold weather gear and looked. My forearms down to my hands were like a medium shaped blue. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm probably in second stage of hypothermia. So I had to get every wet piece of clothes off me and try and figure out, okay, what dry clothes do I have? So I survived the night. That was no problem. But I mean, it was intense. It's like, okay, I'm not going to take for granted, this weather and temperatures and everything. But finally, I made it to Mount Washington, which is an intense climb. And there's a really cool, well-known hut called Lakes in the Cloud Hut. And I mean, you could put 90 people in this hut. And it was really neat because that evening, I actually observed the Milky Way without any lights, and I nearly had to put dark shades on because that's how intense it looked. And I realized right then and there that I was a little dot compared to the universe. The next morning, we would actually make the climb to Mount Washington, which was 1,200 feet of like hell. But we got up to the top. There's the Mount Washington Weather Observatory, and Mount Washington is very known for pulling in storms and pushing out storms. And I think the record wind speed on Mount Washington is like 235 miles per hour. That one morning that happened, they were losing, actually instruments were being torn off the actual observatory. But that morning, it was a little chilly, clear day. It was pretty cool. I spent probably about 3 hours walking around getting pictures. There's an actual cog train that goes from the base up to Mount Washington, which is pretty cool. The next really highlight of my trip was getting into the 100-mile wilderness, which I could tell you is intense. There is a sign before you even start that part of the trail on the AT that it says, if you do not have 10 days of food, do not even attempt this area. Well, with walking 21-mile days, I did 100 miles in 4.5 days. I mean, I was really cruising. The most unbelievable sights and pictures of lakes and intense climbing and everything in the wilderness. Basically, if you lose your life in the 100-mile wilderness, you're probably going to be found within 5 or more years later, because that's how rugged that area of the AT is. So, and I think I came across 2 other hikers throughout the whole 100-mile wilderness, which is pretty cool. Finally, I get to my goal and make it to Baxter State Park, and clear day, me and a couple of the hikers we get together and we come across the bridge into the park itself and look up, and we see Mount Katahdin. Oh, before I want to back up, when I hit my last 4,000 foot elevation was White Top Mountain. I look out on a clear day, and 70 miles away before I started, or in the middle of the 100-mile wilderness, I look out at 70 miles and there's Mount Katahdin. And I looked, I pointed, I says, polar bear's coming for you. So by the time I get in the Baxter State Park, I was real happy. I was like really intense, look up and actually see the mountain itself. And I'm thinking, that's my end of my journey, and that's what I'm going to climb, which is pretty cool. The next morning, we all get together. I think I wake up about 6:30. I'm on trail. It took about a half hour to get to the actual base of Mount Katahdin because one of the bridges had been wiped out the week before. So basically, when I started my climb, it's 5,276 feet above sea level, and which is pretty cool. It is a very intense climb. It took me a mere maybe 3¼ hours to actually do the climb. There was some parts of the climb where you would have maybe have a distance of a little over a foot wide, and you're actually hugging like large boulders, and you're trying to figure out, okay, I got to throw my trekking poles up here, and how am I going to climb like 8 feet? You know, where am I going to put my arms and feet? And there's one part where I look down, and it is nearly a sheer drop. And I'm thinking, okay, hopefully, you know, I'm definitely not going to, you know, end my trip like this. So, but I get at the top, and about 3/4 of the way up, all of a sudden I look, and it goes flat for about 2 miles. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This is even better. So we get to the point where all of a sudden I look over, and the last 600 feet is probably about like a 20-degree climb, which is easy. Me and another young kid, he's a hiker. He was a day hiker. All of a sudden we look up, and I see hikers that are up. I'm thinking, okay, this is where the summit is. So I see a couple hikers, and all of a sudden I seen a sign, which is like the end of your trip, but it's all worth, you know, this 2,200 miles of journey. And I'm like, finally, I'm going to get a chance to touch the sign. And that's where it started getting emotional for me. So I finally make it up and to the summit, and sure enough, there's a sign that says Mount Katahdin on it. And I mean, everybody just hugs it and gives it a kiss and everything. And sign, at that very moment, I thought I had made it to the Mount Everest, which is amazing. I mean, by this time, I'm just, tears are going and everything. And I was so happy to actually complete my journey. It only took probably that night, we got into the actual small town, and just had the time of our lives. Probably I stayed there for like 3 days because I had to get a cheap ticket back home, but I loved it. But it took probably about 48 hours to realize, okay, this is my end of my trip. And I was like, this is it. What I really enjoyed most on the trail was just these amazing sights. I mean, you're hiking, you know, 11, 12-hour days. There was, towards the end of the trail, I actually came in contact with 4 moose. 2 were at a distance, 2 were actually on the trail close. I made it, I think, up in Vermont. I actually came across a black bear that we got nose to nose with. And I was like, ooh, he was more afraid of me than I was it. He spun around, he was gone. What really got me, one of my most scared points was I think it was 18 miles before I got into Baxter State Park. I was above tree line, and all of a sudden I come in contact with a mountain lion, and he was sitting in a big tree just looking at me. I'm thinking, I'm not going out like this. It's like, no, I come to way too far to, you know, have an encounter like this. I got a real close picture. I backed up about half a mile, just sat back like, I'm not going to let this thing, you know, take me out. But it was really neat. I mean, beautiful animal. Got one picture. That was it. I was like, I'm gone. But it was pretty cool. Would I do the trail again? Yes, I do have plans because I had the most awesome time of my life. I mean, the hikers I came in contact with, all the little small towns, which every small town I came in contact with was awesome. They just loved us hikers. I could say how I felt after the trail. I realized that I have to take time for myself. Just relax. There was someone on the trail asked me what 3 things I missed on trail, or don't really miss. One was driving, one was television, and one was big towns or big cities. Loved it. Small towns were great. How it changed me? I'm a better person now. I really never thought I would take on this amazing adventure and actually complete it. because average 1 in every 4 hikers do not complete the trail. By the time they hit Blood Mountain and Neil Gap which is the first, I think, probably 40 miles of the trail, they basically give up. Usually the first week, hikers will give up. And I wasn't going to be one of them. I'm like, I spent too much time preparing for this. I have friends and family that are just so supportive. It's like, I can't quit. So definitely, I will do the trail again. I had so much fun. I really want to get out to some parts of the trail and actually do trail magic for other hikers, which I thought would be pretty neat. So pretty much that's my adventure.
Well, Chris, can you tell everyone what, like, number of calories, how much food you ate, how much weight you lost,
yeah,
and how many shoes you went through? And
I went through 3 pairs of shoes on trail, which is basically normal. The calories per day, you're burning between 4,000 and 6,000 calories on trail. I knew I was not eating enough each day. I mean, I tried. I would pack. My most base weight on my pack was 45 pounds. I mean, I had like 5-6 days of food, and that, I mean, you're just eating, the whole time. I lost 50 pounds on trail. By the time I hit Harper's Ferry, I mean, in a few pictures, you could see that, yeah, I definitely need to eat again. So, but towards the end, I think I gained about 20 pounds back. And I mean, the calves of my legs were just huge. I mean, I looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was like, wow. But my average base weight when I started was 35-pound pack. I had anything and everything on that pack, which I needed.
Cool. Yeah.
Hi, Chris.
I was thrilled to be able to talk to you while you were actually on the trail. I mean,
that was neat.
That was an adventure for me
to
be able to say I did that.
I got into a hotel and all of a sudden I hear this ring, I get a call and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. And it's, oh yeah, we want to interview on the phone. I'm like, okay, oh, cool.
Yeah, it's cool. Anyway.
It's really the really thing that worried me was on trail is, okay, do I have to pack a 9mm? Like, my worry was coming in contact with mama bear and cubs. And actually I missed that chance twice on trail. And we heard from what our shelter was, we heard rustling, and I'm thinking, oh, this might be mama. And it's like, okay, we had our truck and poles ready, like, okay, if she charges, we might be screwed. But average black bear, they look at you, they're gone. They don't want nothing to do with you.
You didn't take bear spray with you?
No, a few people on the trail, I actually found a big thing, a can of bear spray. And from what my understanding, actually, it could go either way. I could either really piss off that bear or actually subdue him where you can get away. But I'm like, I have enough weight in my pack. It's like, I had this little flip knife. That's all I had. And my trekking poles. I'm like, if I come in contact with a bear, I'm stabbing this thing. I'm getting away from this thing one way or another.
How old are you, and how many days did it take you to do the?
I was on trail. I started March 22nd, and I summited Mount Katahdin September 22nd. I was on trail for 180 days. I think I did it in 153. So they'd say between 5 and 7 months of trail, but I was on trail an entire 6 months and loved it.
How long did you?
What's your age?
What did you do to prepare, and how long did you take to prepare?
It took probably about 18 months to prepare. I started, I got the idea on, I think it was November of 2017, and I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. So I sat down, I read books, I seen videos on YouTube. I actually talked to people who did the trail. And until you actually get on the trail, then you get an idea of what to expect. I mean, the first 78 miles is intense. We actually came in contact a few nights with Army Rangers. They came right through camp, and it's like, oh, these guys are cool. So I'm like, yeah, we don't have to worry about no bears.
But did you have to like run or, exercise?
Yeah,
I mean,
I was doing physical training, going through the Middleburg Heights Rec Center, weightlifting. I didn't do really a lot of running, but I did a lot of walking through the metro parks. And there was one part, there's two in Peninsula is like you're back on trail. I mean, the rocks and the tree stumps and the trees and just the look itself.
okay.
And the other part is near actually Boston Mills ski resort.
Okay.
And it's a pretty good elevation distance.
So just
And
like
I would climb that, at least 3 times, in that little part of the day. Oh yeah, you definitely got to prepare yourself for ascents. I mean, it took me a 2,800 ascent, mile, or 2,800 foot ascent just to start that morning on the trail. Took me 10 hours. And I mean, it was a pretty good climb. I'm thinking, oh crap, what am I really getting myself into? But until you get on a trail, then you get a full idea of what to expect. And it's cool. I mean,
Hey, Chris, you started in the south and went north. Is there a reason you did that direction and not the other direction, and why? And do most people go that way or the other way, or what?
normally everyone pretty much does what they call a noble hike. They go northbound. Actually, southbound, when you start at Mount Katahdin, basically Katahdin opens up probably the first week in June because there's still 9 feet of snow. And there are parts of Katahdin where it's extremely dangerous. I mean, they have I think the sawtooth or dragon's tooth or whatever. It is rocks that if you fall, you're really going to be tearing yourself open and everything. Blood Mountain was the same way. I mean, it took a 2.5 hour descent on Blood Mountain. It's like, I took my time because a lot of parts, if you fall, you're screwed. I mean, if you're by yourself and you're within, a couple of days of town, you're really in trouble.
Chris,
Yep.
I was astounded why the trail takes you up and over so many mountains.
Oh.
It would seem to me they could create a trail that would be a lot flatter than the one that they established. And your trip all the way up to the top of Mount Washington was amazing. Oh. Did you go to the observatory?
Oh yeah, I loved it. It is like the coolest
comment
place.
You made, that was the highest wind speed ever recorded on Earth.
231 miles an hour. Yep. And I think that was back in the early 60s or something like that. And within a month later, it was 70 degrees below zero and 140 mile an hour winds. Because I have this app that gives me real-time information. It's like, 35 mile an hour winds was blowing me away. I mean, I'm literally going sideways on the trail, and the rain was coming sideways. Like over 200 mile an hour winds. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Right.
But it's pretty good.
Were there days watching the weather?
Yeah, there were days where it was totally. All of a sudden this storm would roll in. And just pound you, and then a couple hours later, and you're like soaked. You got rain gear on, cold gear on. That was my biggest worry when I started the presidentials, is that part of the trail where I figured, okay, I'm in trouble. It's like, do I turn back or do I keep on going? It's like, I should have turned back that morning or that afternoon.
Chris, do you stay in touch with anybody who was on the trail, like that you met up with?
Actually, the morning I started with 3 other guys that were from Ohio and never seen the rest of the trail. I did actually come in contact with a hiker that actually caused the death of another one. And this guy, he actually was schizophrenic and should have never been on the trail. And he actually committed a murder. And I actually tried committing a second murder to a young lady, a young hiker. She was from Canada. She actually got defensive wounds, and she literally ran like 5 miles to get law enforcement. And they come back, and this guy's sitting there, all bloodied, and they took him into custody. And it's like, we didn't know that he actually got back on trail until Marion, Virginia. We're like, wait a minute, he got back on trail? Because there's an area where law enforcement shut it down by that partnership shelter. We seen said no hikers after this part. I was like, why? He said, now it's considered a crime scene. So, well, we were lucky the next morning we were able to actually continue the hike, but we're like, this crazy guy got back on trail. But the average hiker was cool. We loved it was like a little family. We all actually looked out for each other. I met people from New Zealand, and I hiked with one guy. His trail name was Tree Trunk. He was from Australia. Just this big guy, and he was real cool.
All right. Any other questions, Chris?
I have a question, Chris. For supplies, like, did you would you just resupply at the small towns, or did you have
Yeah.
packages like pre-planned and
Actually, towards the end, I had 2 packages sent to me by my folks. But normally, I would get into town. The best resupply places that we found out as hikers was Dollar Generals and dollar stores. Every now and then, we would. I think I went through like 3 or 4 grocery stores. But besides that, I mean, for $40, I can have 3.5 days of food on trail.
Chris, you never really talked about Ohio.
Mhm.
What was it like going through the Appalachian Trail in Ohio?
And in Appalachian Trail and who?
In Ohio.
The actual parts that I thought I was training for is that there's a place called the Ledges in Peninsula, Ohio, about a 35-minute drive from here, which it somewhat gives you the actual climbing, the ascents and everything. It's not really major, but it basically is like being out in the forest. I mean, it's really cool. There were times when we were on a trail and we heard like a highway. We could hear cars moving. It's like, okay, which direction is that coming from? And sometimes we'd actually have to cross that highway like real quick. But another part, which is really cool, was the different locks on the actual metro parks, which is pretty cool. I mean, you get a little elevation climb and descent and everything, but that's pretty much until you actually get on trail. Then I'm thinking, 4,000 foot ascent, no problem. Yeah, sure. Try doing that, and it's intense.
All right. Well, thank you very much for speaking with us this morning, Chris, and getting up early.
Thank you.
And please join us anytime.
Cool. Okay.